On my first bike tour, here are 5 things I did wrong, 4 things I did right, and 3 things I could have done better. I went on my first bike tour in 1981 when I was 17 years old. Me and 2 buddies, we were planning on riding our bikes from Chicago to Minnesota. We didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't know anybody that ever bike toured before, and there was no internet at the time. Heck, we didn't even know it was called bike touring. We were just going for a ride. Well, my buddies backed out at the last minute, but I decided to go anyway, by myself. I didn't care. That was my first big adventure, and I've been touring ever since. Looking back at that trip, there were a lot of things I did wrong, but there were some things I did right, and there were a lot of things I could have done better. All right, 5 things I did wrong. Number 1, you guessed it, I carried way too much stuff. Not only did I carry too much stuff, I carried the wrong stuff. I mean, I had like 2 pair of blue jeans, a couple of sweatshirts, all kinds of stuff that I didn't need. I carried like 5 days worth of food. That was ridiculous. And I don't mean like freeze-dried meals, I mean like cans of food. It never dawned on me that I could stop at a restaurant or a grocery store anywhere along the way. I thought I was gonna be like on a wilderness trip. And then on my first day, for lunch, I stopped at a burger stand. On my second trip, I carried a lot less stuff. But you know what? I still probably carry way too much stuff. I know I could go a lot lighter, but I like my luxury items. Second thing I did wrong on my first bike tour is I carried a backpack. And I don't mean a small day pack, I mean like a medium soft pack filled with clothes. Halfway through the first day, it got all sweaty. Halfway through the trip, it got all stinky. It was awful. On my second trip, I didn't carry anything on my back. I'm the motor, and I don't want to do anything to impede the motor. I make my bike carry everything. If it doesn't fit on my bike, it's not coming with. The third thing I did wrong on my first bike trip, I wore the wrong shorts. I didn't even own bike shorts. In 1981, only weirdos and professional bike racers wore spandex shorts. Hey, I was 17, I just missed out on being a hippie, and all I had were these Levi cutoff shorts. I wore them everywhere. I thought they were pretty cool. Riding around town with my buddies, I never noticed it. But after 2 or 3 days on a bike tour, I was so saddle sore. For my second trip, I had 2 pair of bike touring shorts. They looked kind of like normal shorts, but they were made for biking. I would wear them 2 days in a row without underwear and then change them out. That way I got 4 days out of them before I had to do laundry. I still got a little saddle sore, but not like the first trip. Alright, the fourth thing I did wrong is I had the wrong shoes. I didn't even know they had special shoes for biking. I was probably wearing something like an old pair of Converse or, Keds or something like that. But I learned that the flex in the sole and the way the sole compresses, you really lose a lot of efficiency that way. A good pair of biking shoes are stiff, they don't flex. And the soles are hard, they don't compress. That way, all the power you're putting into that stroke is transferred into the pedal, and it's not lost in the shoe. I didn't even know I was riding inefficiently. I figured I'd just pedal harder. On my second trip, I had a decent pair of cycling shoes. On the bike, those shoes gave me wings. Off the bike, they were a form of cruel and unusual punishment. All right, number 5, the 5th thing I did wrong on my first bike tour, I didn't even bring a camera, so I have no record of my first trip. Yeah, I didn't even bring a camera on my second trip. It wasn't until my third trip that my dad loaned me his little Kodak Pocket Instamatic. Even though the learning curve was pretty steep, it wasn't all mayhem and misery. There were some things that I did right. So here's 4 things I did right on my first bike tour. Number 1, I went. I was only 17, but I went. Even though my buddies backed out and a bunch of people tried to talk me out of it, I went anyway. It was my first big adventure, and look at me, 40 years later, I'm still talking about it. The second thing I did right on my first bike tour is I set reasonable goals. I wasn't out to ride my bike all the way across the country. I was only going for a week. It was my first trip. I was riding to my uncle's house, and I knew he'd be waiting for me when I got there. Tell you, I got a lot of admiration for people that just jump out there and ride across the country on their first trip ever. At 17, that was probably a little too much for me, especially going solo. It was just enough so that when I got home, I was already planning for the next trip. But even at that age, I knew my limitations, and I set reasonable goals for daily mileage and for the whole trip in general. I pored over maps for weeks before I left, and I planned out each day. I had a pretty good idea where I was going to stay and how many miles I was going to do each day. All right, moving on. The third thing I did right on my first bike tour is I was in very good physical condition. Heck, I was only 17. And when I graduated from high school, I was pretty much in the best shape I was ever in. I felt pretty indestructible. Not anymore though. These days, I treat my body with a little bit more kindness. What do they say? Youth is wasted on the young. All right, number 4. The fourth thing I did right on my first bike tour, I carried the most important thing you could possibly bring. I brought with me a sense of adventure. I'd never been outside Cook County before, so there's something new around every bend and something interesting just over that next hill. I had more experiences in 1 week than my buddies had all summer long staying home. I can promise you that. All right, there were 3 things I could have done better, so here we go. Number 1, I could have used better maps. At the time, I had this big old Rand McNally atlas that had all 50 states. I didn't need all 50 states. I only needed like 3. I didn't need California. I didn't have a map case. So every time I had to stop and check directions, I'd have to stop, get off my bike, go through my bags, get out my map. That was a pain. Really slowed down the day, but it was either that or get lost. Plus, those maps really didn't show much detail, so I was stuck riding on a lot of the busier highways. I didn't even know there were backcountry roads. So, thank you Adventure Cycling. You guys got the best cycling maps. Nowadays though, just about every state has maps designed specifically for cyclists. There are way more bike paths now than there were 40 years ago, and I think the rail-to-trail system is phenomenal. Alright, the second thing I could have done better on my first bike tour, I could have had better camping equipment. Of course, I was a teenager and pretty much broke, and I couldn't afford good camping equipment. I had one of those old rectangular sleeping bags. It predated anything that even resembled a modern sleeping bag. I had a brand new $25 Montgomery Ward tent. It didn't even have a floor. I don't think I even had a sleeping pad. Heck, my best piece of gear was the backpack. Okay, the third thing I could have done better is I wish I would have had better gears on my bike. My bike wasn't bad, but it was just geared all wrong. At the time, I had a new Mikado 10-speed bike. It was probably the nicest bike I ever owned up to that time, but it just wasn't geared for touring. It was really kind of a low-end racing bike. I'd never heard of the Wisconsin driftless area before, but I'll tell you what, when I got there on my bike, I wished I had lower gears. For a suburban kid, those hills were pretty steep. Modern bikes are geared so much better. I love my granny gears. Anyways, about 4 days into this trip, I was just south of La Crosse, Wisconsin, along the Mississippi River, and I ran into 4 bikers who were way more experienced than me, but they were going the same direction as I was. They had all the right gear, they had all the right clothes, they had all the right shoes. They obviously knew what they were doing. I rode with those guys for the next day and a half. That's when I got answers to most of my questions. Answers to questions I wasn't even asking. In a day and a half, I got to be pretty good friends with those guys. And when we parted ways, they confided in me. They said that when they saw me coming down the road with my backpack and my cut-off blue jeans, they were pretty amazed. But then, in the first hour, when they tried to dust me and they couldn't, they were even more amazed. But now, I really do feel like an old-timer, telling stories about the old days, concern it. Why, back in my day, yeah. Anyway, this is the part where I'm supposed to say, thanks for watching, go ride your bike. But really, I just want to go have a cup of hot cocoa and take a nap. Anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble and talk about the old days. Now, go ride your bike.